Welcome to Go Open, the world's only program dedicated entirely to open source and the movement thereof. How far does the movement go? Well, Mars actually, which is a fair distance off. Remember Rover, that little thing named after a dog that went all the way to Mars to scribble around and find a fossil that no one can work out what it is. Well, it wouldn't have been able to do that. It's a long way to go for a bone, basically. It wouldn't have been able to do that without open source. So that's amazing. Also, if you keep listening and pay attention to what you hear, answer our questions and win some fantastic prizes.
Open source software exists as a result of the combined efforts of millions of computer programmers, users, and software vendors from around the world. They share their intellectual property freely, and they believe that software should cost nothing and should enrich the lives of users. Open source software is the alternative and biggest challenger to closed source or proprietary software. It generally costs the user nothing. It can be distributed freely to anyone. Download it, use it, modify it, and give it away. It's a whole new world. Open source is the future of computing.
Space is a very interesting concept. In fact, it's quite important to me. I really need space, but not that much. So just, right, our next insert is quite interesting because there are two Norrises that we all know, or should. Chuck Norris is one, but Jeff Norris is another one. He works for NASA.
It's the final frontier, or so they say. But it's more than just idle curiosity that keeps men reaching for the stars. The International Space Station has yielded fantastic results in most of the sciences, and now Mars is starting to reveal great secrets about the creation of the planets and how our very own planet came to be. To this end, America's National Aeronautics and Space Administration spent billions of dollars to send 2 robotic probes on a 7-month journey to Mars. The trajectory was so precise that they were able to direct the probes to 2 specific sites on the red planet that may have had water in the distant past.
We've discovered that water has existed in a salty sea form at the Opportunity rover's landing site. A remarkable discovery, one that we simply didn't know that about Mars before we went there.
Jeff Norris is the Chief Software Architect and Development Team Lead for the Science Activity Planner for the 2003 Mars Exploration Rover mission. Part of his duties include working on the team that determines what each rover does each Martian day.
We don't operate these rovers like you would a remote control car because of the significant amount of time that it takes for us to transmit a signal from Earth to Mars. Rather than telling it, okay, drive forward and tell us what you see, we tell it a whole day of things to accomplish. And then during the day on Mars, it accomplishes those tasks primarily autonomously, meaning that we're not in contact with it at all. And then at the end of the day, it sends back the results of that day's work. So it was certainly something that made our software something challenging to write.
It's a long way to go, and at great expense, so everything had to have the very best chance at survival. This was the first time in the history of NASA that the administrators decided that open source software was mature enough to be used in such a mission-critical way.
So early on in the development of our software, instead of asking the question for every requirement, how can we develop this, we asked the question, is there any way we can avoid developing this? So that led us to consider open source software in a number of cases.
Although open source software is not used on the rovers themselves, it plays a major part in many aspects of the mission.
The place where open source software was used to great success on this mission was in the ground operations software. So these are the tools that we use on Earth to analyze what the rover is telling us and to tell it what to do next.
During the testing and design phase, the NASA team found that the open source community was surprisingly responsive, especially when compared with the support from developers of commercial software that was also in the project.
One of the greatest motivators for open source software developers is seeing their work used in an interesting way. They were extremely responsive to our needs. In many cases, we would discover a problem with the software, and they would send us a correction for the problem within hours.
Although NASA is a multi-billion-dollar operation, it still has to keep an eye on the budget. And Jeff admits that this was part of the motivation. But there were other factors.
It allowed us to conserve our resources for the problems that we knew we had to accomplish. And when we were early in the process and didn't know exactly how the program was going to shape up, and we knew that part of the program could be covered by an open source software package, we could sort of not worry about that part of the program for a while. And if, and as things often do, things change during the development of the project, if we suddenly had to retreat from that area and not work on that after all, if we didn't need that after all, we hadn't invested our resources in developing it. So there's a benefit both in cost reduction to our project, as well as, I believe, an increased agility in the development process.
The rovers have now passed their first birthdays and are still sending back valuable data from Mars, far in excess of the project's expectations. They have traveled a combined distance of over 6 kilometers and sent back thousands of pictures and rock analyses.
My team is also helping NASA to reach out to the public with our software. We've released a binary version at this point of our software to the general public. So we're also asking, what can we do in the future to make our software more exciting for the general public? Because we believe that we can serve both missions. We can enable the success of future missions on Mars while also allowing people in the general public to participate and learn about the mission with us.
From Red Planets to Red Hat. Red Hat's main product is a version of the Linux operating system which sells for very little, and you can also download it for free. How do you make money out of that? Well, to tell us, let's speak to one of the co-founders of Red Hat. Here's Bob Young.
Well, let's start up. I believe you were a middleweight boxer, but you're considered to be a heavyweight contender in the world of open source. Tell us how you got into that to begin with all those years ago.
I was trying to rent Sun Microsystems and Apollo Computer Unix workstations. And the engineers who I was talking to about these things were asking me about open source software. And I listened to their story. You know, I'd ask them where this stuff comes from, and they'd all tell me, well, it's from engineers according to their skill, to engineers according to their need. But anyway, shortly after I first was introduced, I found myself unemployed. I was launching a little software distribution system, and I started adding these what are now open source products to my catalog. They became my best sellers, and I very quickly learned that there was actually a business in giving away software for free. And what you learn very quickly as a salesman is you'll only be successful if you're actually delivering real value, something your customers really need, in a way that your competitors simply aren't solving that need. And what you saw very early on in the open source free software movement is we could do something for our customers that Oracle and IBM and Apple Computer and Microsoft simply were not prepared to do, which was delivering control to the customer.
What do you think currently is the biggest problem with open source?
I don't think there is one, to be honest. Any technology model takes many years, literally decades, to become the dominant model. So, you know, open source really only started getting some traction in the mid-90s. We're now only 9 years later, and we're beginning to see the consideration of open source for every application. Another 10 years from now, people will forget that in the early 90s, you couldn't get source code for the technology that you were building your organization around. You were completely dependent on the vendor, and people are going to shake their heads and wonder who allowed that model to exist.
Since you were the entrepreneur with Red Hat, how did you get the name and the marketability out there to the world? Because everyone internationally, if they've heard of Linux, they've heard of Red Hat.
Red Hat's brand from the very earliest day is that every line of code we distribute under an open source license. We treat you as a partner in the development of this technology.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining us here at GoPen. It was really interesting chatting to you.
Thanks, Mark, and good luck with the Go Open project. It sounds fascinating.
Thanks, Bob. I'm not into commercial TV. I don't get on TV. I get in TVs. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Okay, so after the break we go stargazing at the heart of Beershoek Radio Astronomy Observatory. How's that for a long name? Ooh. How does Mother Nature practice safe and responsible family planning? Earth control, that's correct. How does it happen? Well, it's quite simple. There is an enormous radio telescope at Hartbeeshoek in our very own Magalies Mountains that's used by NASA sometimes. How do you like that? It's so sensitive that cell phones and microwave ovens aren't allowed in that area. And the shuttle can't come in because there's no place for it to be parked safely. It doesn't have tracker, no gear lock, and no removable radio.
The Harabiesuk Radio Astronomy Observatory is hidden away in an isolated valley in the Michalisburg mountain range. Built in 1961 by NASA, the observatory was used back then in the space race. Nowadays, it's owned and run under the auspices of South Africa's National Research Foundation. Dr. Jonathan Quick is in charge of all instrumentation and computing at the observatory.
Well, part of the problem with astronomy is that you need to be able to interpret the signals that you're receiving. A radio wave comes in from space, but before we observe it, we actually convert it into an electrical signal. And in order to be able to maintain the continuity of the so-called calibration, you have to intimately understand how you're getting from one value to the other value. So if there's any black box in the wave which you cannot understand or be able to open up and see exactly how it's wired, you then lose that continuity of calibration that I was talking about.
The telescope is a massive 26-meter diameter dish with moving parts weighing in at 200 tons. Huge electric motors push this vast mass around, placing this dish exactly where it has to point. If a radio signal is coming in, this huge bulk of steel has to be positioned to within 0.002 of a degree, a matter of a few millimeters. And thanks to the power of modern processors, normal desktop computers make this kind of extreme precision possible. Sarah Buchner is doing her doctorate at the observatory.
It's very much a niche market with very specialized software, which must be high precision, accurate.
Proprietary software doesn't allow people to examine or alter the source code. As a result, scientists prefer open source software because they're free to lift the lid and make changes as they need to.
In order for an astronomer to trust some software, to trust a black box which someone gives you, you have to be able to understand what it's doing, which means that you have to be able to look at the source code.
It enables us to get into the guts of what's happening, to be able to tinker with it if it doesn't do what we want to do. The telescope itself is controlled through a specific hardware board for which no driver existed under Linux. So the whole driver interface through which we communicate is handwritten by myself.
NASA handed the center over to the CSIR in the mid-70s, but Harabiesuk still plays a vital role in their explorations. In fact, the entire Mars rover project wouldn't have been possible without input from the team in this desolate valley south of the equator.
In order to get a probe to Mars, we need to know where Mars is going to be when the probe arrives there. We also need to know when to launch the probe, so we need to know which way the Earth is pointing at a particular time in order to find the optimum time to launch the probe. And in order to do this, we need to know the exact rotation parameters of the Earth, how fast it's rotating, how that's changing.
When aiming at a planet that's 80 million kilometers away, the word exact takes on a whole new meaning.
Because of the distances to Mars, getting wrong the angle by a small amount can mean that you miss Mars completely.
This is where Harabiesuk fits in. The observatory is used to determine the exact position of Earth in relation to other planets. Through this minute observation, scientists are also able to tell how fast and how far the surface of the Earth is shifting.
This is all related to the base of this telescope, which is moving at 2.5 centimeters a year in that direction, together with the whole African continental plate.
Around the world, astronomy is largely an underfunded endeavor. Because of this, astronomers have created a tight-knit community.
The telescope is fully controlled by open source software. The coordination is all done in terms of open source software, because obviously if you want to coordinate many observatories, each observatory needs to be 100% sure they're doing exactly the same thing. And the only way you can do that is by common software, and by common software that everybody is free to tinker with and make sure fits into your system.
One of the strengths of this observatory is we haven't got the biggest telescope in the world, or we're not that well-funded, well-resourced, but it's a small group of dedicated people who are trying to do clever things cheaply, and that's where open source fits in with us perfectly.
Our Geek of the Week is Thomas Fogwell of the CSIR. Thomas, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
You're at the CSIR.
That's correct.
The Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, is this?
Yeah, that's right.
What is it that you do there?
I'm a software developer. I design, architect, and develop software systems for clients. How I got involved in open source basically came about as a result of my career there, where I use a lot of open source tools to develop custom solutions for clients.
You mentioned government kind of embracing open source.
One of the projects I've been involved in recently is a project we did for the Department of Public Service Administration. It's basically an anti-corruption management information system. And it was done using only open source tools. And the idea is also to open source the code that we developed there to allow other governments to use it as well. Government, particularly Department of Science and Technology, are trying to foster an indigenous ICT industry that's self-sufficient and that can be globally competitive.
Okay.
And they see open source as a mechanism to doing that. The CSR has a project, a migration project, where the idea is to migrate as many of the desktop and servers to open source as possible. And the role of the CSR there is very much one of setting the example almost for government and for other companies in the country, basically proving that it can be done.
How do you see open source playing a role in education?
A lot of what I've learned about computers has been as a direct result of using open source. Open source tends to engage the user in ways that proprietary software doesn't. It allows you access to the source code, which means you can learn how the software works. You can learn from the best out there, basically, how to develop good software.
What do you think is the best thing you've ever achieved using open source?
Professionally, we've had a couple of good successes at the CSR, things like Digital Doorway and various others, where we are trying to further some of the goals of government, by promoting the adoption of ICT learning in the country.
Stay with us. Coming up next, we'll be looking at outer space, but not by going there, because that tends to be a bit disastrous, from the comfort of your own computers. We found out about a free audio mix package that'll turn you into a sound engineer almost like this, and you might be interested to know that you can order your very own DVD set of this entire series or download each one for free from the website. Before we hit competition mode, I'm going to let Mr. Shuttleworth introduce you to some software that's sound software that's really sound, but it also sounds sound, and it's about sound, and it's sound. So I guess you could say it's sound.
Today we'll be doing it with Audacity. Audacity is free software that allows you to be a sound engineer. So you can take native audio formats, mix them, add effects, become a professional DJ, create music, design songs, a complete sound editing suite.
Audacity is compatible with a variety of sound formats, including WAV and, of course, Ogg Vorbis. There are tools for cutting and pasting, changing levels, and pitch and tone changing. It has filters like echo and noise removal, and support for third-party VST, LADSPA, and Nyquist plugins. Multiple tracks are supported, and it's available on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS X.
So with Audacity, you have all of the free software tools you need to be a serious sound engineer.
Shutters, we have some bad news. We worked out that if you'd found out about X-Planet earlier, you wouldn't have had to spend all that money getting shipped off to space. And let's face it, the equivalent of a little Beetle with big engines on the back and being a bit nervous about all little portholes. Oh, Earth, oh, you, oh. You could have just done it all from the comfort of your own chair by switching your computer on and watching X-Planet.
While it's true that in a few decades almost everyone will be able to afford space travel, at this moment, if you want to reach the stars, your options are limited. Until now, that is. X-Planet is a piece of free open source software that puts you in your very own space shuttle. With X-Planet, you get to leave Earth. Most of the planets and stars in our solar system have been accurately mapped into X-Planet. They orbit in real time. They move the way real stars and planets actually move. Let's say you decide to look longingly down on Earth. X-Planet plugs into the free NASA satellite feed for weather charts, so you get to know what's cloudy and what's hot on this, our third rock from the sun. Best of all, X-Planet is free, so stop saving up for your own personal space shuttle and download X-Planet. We've got liftoff.
Open source is the gift that never stops giving. There's even more spaced out stuff for you on the web. So write down these web addresses or just find them on our website, which is www.goopensource.org.
Yearning for a little more space, are you? X-Planet not enough for you? Well, it's Celestia to the rescue. Point your web shuttle at www.shatters.net and download your very own free real space simulator. You get to experience our universe in 3 dimensions. Unlike most planetarium software, you're not confined to the Earth's surface with Celestia. You can take celestial journeys through our solar system or to more than 100,000 stars or even beyond our galaxy. And if you're tired of getting lost in space, use your superior hand-eye coordination and three-dimensional perceptivity to play Neverball. You can find it at this site, eculus.org/Neverball. Remember those puzzle games you played as a child where you had to get the balls into the slots by moving the platform around? Well, Neverball is exactly the same, but it's hyper sophisticated and uses real mathematical modeling to make the ball behave as it would in real life. It's an obstacle course and a battle against time. A different battle against time is keeping up with the latest gadgets. www.gizmodo.com is gizmo heaven for geeks and the rest of us. If you've ever felt the pressure of keeping up with the Joneses, this site will make sure you know about the latest gadget before the Joneses even get out of their starting blocks. There are ridiculous numbers of new gadgets written about every day, and they're all classified into categories and subcategories, so you can filter out gizmo genres that don't appeal to you. This week's sites again are www.shatters.net/Celestia, where you can download your own free real space simulator. Eculus.org/Neverball is where you'll find one of the most challenging three-dimensional games around for free. And www.gizmodo.com is the place to go if you suffer from gadget yearning overload.
But now, it's competition time. You may be able to win. Let's see if you were distracted by all the talk of aliens, or possibly you felt in some way a strange attraction and that maybe you did belong in Uranus. Who knows? We're not sure. But now you could win a 17-inch flat screen monitor, or one of 2 LG DVD drives, or 2 vouchers worth 1,000 Rand each from Soviet Jeans, or a photo smart camera and printer bundle from Hewlett-Packard. All you have to do is answer this question with an SMS. Open source software was used in A, the car in the movie Back to the Future, B, the Mars rover mission, or C, E.T.'s bicycle spacecraft taking him back home. Please answer that question with a letter only, A, B, or C, and SMS that letter along with your name to 34357. The SMSs are charged at 2 Rand each. And the winners of last week's competition are... Who's the winner? Who's the winner? Hey!
Faisal Kasim wins a 17-inch monitor from LG. Malcolm Taylor and Beverly Mayers win an LG DVD writer each. Gertrude Lenders and Ashraf Edros win 1,000 Rand Soviet Jeans vouchers each. And Fernando Pizzo wins an HP camera and printer. Well done!
Internet security is quite a big issue for a lot of people. In fact, it's bigger than most of us. But next week we find out how open source can help us rest more easily in that regard. We also find out about how Linux is all around us, but we can't always see it, like that awful thing that people do in lifts occasionally and then look at you as if you did it. Well, shame on them. We also discover what a box in the garden is and how it can help us to keep our plants moist at all times, as they should be. Peace out.